Good morning, everyone. My name is Molly Tenbrook, and I want to thank you all for joining us today for our webinar. Today's webinar will focus on Altium to PADS Professional migration. Before we jump in, I would just like to give you a brief introduction to Trilogic and what we do. For over 30 years, Trilogic has provided software and services enabling engineering groups to design, develop, and deliver products through excellent support, training, and consulting services to help you achieve success sooner. Oasis Sales has been a Mentor Premier Partner for over 16 years. Their industry knowledge and experience make them uniquely qualified to understand your business and how technology will help their customers be successful. As you can see on the map are the two territories that Trilogic and Oasis cover. And now I just want to introduce today's presenter, Chris Kleppinger. Chris graduated from Portland State University with a degree in electrical engineering. He is experienced in the EDA industry and joined Mentor Graphics 4 years ago. Chris helped new and potential customers find the best PCB solutions for their needs and worked in customer support solving service requests for Mentor schematic tools. Chris now works as an applications engineer focusing on supporting customer needs for Mentor's PCB layout tools, primarily PADS Professional and Expedition. He supports North American distributors, customers, ensuring successful use of their tools.
Thanks, Molly. Yeah, so like Molly said, my name is Chris Kleppinger. I'm an application engineer here with Mentor Graphics, and I work with all of our distributors, so Oasis, Trilogic, very closely, as well as the other distributors in North America. So if you do have any questions, feel free to reach out to me. I'd be happy to help you out, and I will put my contact information up at the end as well. All right, so today we're going to go through a translation from Altium to PADS Professional. And I'm just going to go through a few slides real quick just to give you guys an idea of what we're going to go through today and what the flow will be. So here's the migration flow if you have a design that you have in Altium and you want to bring it over to PADS Professional. The first step we're going to want to do is synchronize the designs in Altium. This is very important because we want to make sure that the schematic and layout integrity is saved throughout the translation process. So if your schematic and layout are not in sync in Altium, we're still able to bring it over to PADS Professional, but we're going to run into a lot more errors and headaches down the road trying to figure out if we want schematic values or layout values in our final design. So it's much better if you're able to synchronize the designs in Altium and make sure that everything is in sync before we move forward. So that's step one. After that, we're going to create a design-specific central library. So we'll start with an empty library, and then as we translate our design, we're going to bring over all of our schematic symbols, our cells, pad stacks, and parts into this design-specific central library. After that, we're going to define the mounting holes, and this actually goes into the next step of translating the cells and pad stacks through layout. The way that our translator works is that we're not able to automatically determine which pad stacks are mounting holes. So if we don't have those defined beforehand, those are going to come through as normal pad stacks, and then we may have a mismatch in some of our parts with the number of pins that are available because they'll come over as normal pad stacks. So we could have a cell come over that shows up with 7 pad stacks when it's only supposed to have 5 pad stacks and 2 mounting holes. So it's much easier if we're able to define those before we do any translation. So if you do know which cells have mounting holes, we'll go ahead and define those beforehand so that the translator can automatically convert those correctly. Sometimes people aren't able to determine which cells and pins on those cells are mounting holes. So if you do not know that right now, that's okay. There's a couple other ways we can do it. We can convert them to mounting holes on the PADS Professional side, or what I've even seen some people do is once it's translated to PADS Professional, determine which holes are, or which pad stacks are mounting holes, and then go through the translation again because it's a pretty quick process and you're able to do so if you define it beforehand. So we'll define those mounting holes and then we'll translate the cells and pad stacks into our new central library that we've created. After that, we're going to go ahead and translate our schematic, symbols, and parts. So the schematic will come over as well as the symbols and parts will be translated and placed into our central library, and those will be linked up with the pad stacks and cells that we brought through earlier. After that, we'll go ahead and translate the layout from Altium to PADS Professional. And then the last and probably the most important step is we're going to want to make sure that we package our schematic and forward annotate our design. So this is going to make sure that our schematic in Pads Designer, as well as our layout in Pads Professional Layout, will be in sync so that any changes made will be synchronized between the schematic and layout, and that we can move forward with any edits in our design and make sure that the integrity is in check. Just a couple more slides here. These are the supported file types in Altium. I won't go through this too much, but we do support most of the file types in Altium. A lot of text on this slide, but it's just good to be aware of what we do support, as well as all of this is documented in the Altium to Pads Professional Translator User's Guide, which is available in your Pads Professional support documentation when you download the documentation, as well as on Support Center. Okay, so prerequisites. Of course, we're going to need Pads Professional software, and it needs to be fully licensed on your machine. During the install for Pads Professional, you're going to want to make sure that you select the box for installing the Altium to Pads Professional translators. I do believe those are checked by default, but you're going to want to make sure that you have it installed. And if you don't have the translators installed, you can easily add those to your Pads Professional installation. Of course, we're going to need our Altium design files. These are typically the PRJ, PCB, or the schematic doc files, as well as our PCB doc files. And as I mentioned earlier, the Altium design must be synchronized in Altium beforehand. Again, this isn't a 100% necessity, but it will save a lot of headaches down the road if our designs are in sync before we try to bring them over. And then a list of the mounting holes. Again, this is something that helps quite a bit if we do know that beforehand. But if we do not know which pad stacks are mounting holes, there's a couple different ways we can edit that later. Okay, so as I've mentioned before, that mounting holes are important to define beforehand. So there's actually two files that we're going to define this in, and I'll go through and show you how to do this live as well. This is an alt to pads.ini file, as well as a ppcb to hkp.ini file. And these are in the Mentor Graphics install on your Pads Professional install directory. And the syntax for this will be to name the footprint or the cell, and then equal the pins that are mounting holes. And if you don't do this correctly, you're probably going to run into some errors when you try to forward annotate your design, if some mismatches between pin numbers in a schematic symbol as well as a cell. So it will be pretty obvious if this hadn't been done correctly that you need to remedy it later down the road. Okay, so let's go ahead and get started in the demo. So again, our first step is synchronizing the designs in Altium. I don't have Altium on my machine, so I'm going to assume that the designs are already synchronized. And we're going to go ahead and create a design-specific central library. So I'm going to open up Pads Designer. And throughout this demo, you're going to see me using these shortcut keys on my Windows taskbar. This is the same as the Start menu taskbar in Windows. I just like to pin it to my Windows taskbar just because I'm using this tool all day long, and it's much easier for me to access the tools. But of course, you can just go into your Start menu and navigate to Pads Professional and open up Pads Designer. Okay, so now we have Pads Designer open. We're going to go ahead and start to create a new project. And first, what we're going to want to do is we're going to create a Pads Professional project, and we're going to hit this plus button here to create a new central library. This will allow us to create a central library that is specific to this design that we are bringing over. So we'll go ahead and hit New. And you'll navigate to where you want to save it. I already created a folder for this webinar, and we'll just name it USB panel lib. And this will go ahead and create a default central library. You'll have a few default symbols in there, as well as default partitions. And then the name of this, the project we're bringing over is a USB panel. So I'll go ahead and name it the same thing for the name. And we'll go ahead and create this new project. Okay, so now we have our blank schematic started, and I'm going to go ahead and just open up PADS library tools to make sure our central library was created correctly. It is just letting me know that the property definition file has been updated, so that's okay. And here, this is the location that I saved the new central library in, so that looks good. And we should have some default partitions here, as well as some default symbols, some border symbols, and most of these should be empty. No capacitors, nothing here. So this looks like a good new central library. Okay, so let's go back to our flow chart. We've created our design-specific central library, and now we're going to go ahead and define our mounting holes that we're going to bring over. So this is what I mentioned earlier in the two configuration files that are in your install directory. So I'll go ahead and navigate to those. Again, this is in your install directory, SDD home folder, pads, Win32 bin. And of course, you may not memorize this. This is outlined in the Altium to PADS Professional Translator user guide, so you can reference this later. And so the first file that we want to edit is this alt2pads.ini file. So we'll go ahead and open up this. You'll see a lot of information in here. This is for many different translators if you're bringing it from different tools. But today we're just focusing on Altium, so we can go ahead and look at this ProTel section here, ProTel mounting holes. Pin number prefix default is at MH for mounting hole. I'm just going to go ahead and leave that because that's a good prefix for us. And then we'll define all of our cells that have mounting holes in them. In this demo, I just have one cell that has mounting holes. So in here, the cell name is PSC 1.5 by 5. And the two pins that are mounting holes here is M1 and M2. So I've got that all labeled correctly here. And if you have any more, you'll want to list them below as well. So that file is set up correctly, so we can go ahead and save that. And the other one that we just need to take a look at is this PPCB2HKP. And in here, we have to make sure that the pin number prefix is the same as what we defined in alt2pads.ini. And that's at MH, so that is the same, so that's okay, and we can go ahead and save this. And the reason that there's two different configuration files that we need to check up on here is because previously, Altium's translations had to go from Altium to PADS, and then from PADS to PADS Professional. Nowadays, I'm using VX 2.4, and at least for a few releases now, the translator has done both of those translations all in one step. So in the background, the translator is actually converting it from Altium to PADS and then PADS to PADS Professional. So there are two steps going on in the background, but what we see with our user interface is just one step. So it makes it a lot easier for us, but in the background, there's a couple things going on. Okay, so now I have all my mounting holes defined. So define mounting holes, that's done. And next we're going to translate cells and pad stacks through layout. So again, I'm going to open up into the PADS Professional files, and we'll go to our translators and open up the Altium PCB translator. And in here, we're going to select the Altium project file. So I'll go ahead and navigate to the PCB doc file for our USB panel. There's the PCB doc. And then PADS Professional project file. So we're going to go ahead and link it to this schematic up here that we created. Panel. It's going to go ahead and link it to our blank schematic. But what we're mostly concerned about right now is wanting to bring over the cells and the pad stacks. So we're going to want to keep both of these boxes checked, translating the design. It will bring over the layout file, which we're not too concerned about at this stage, but bringing over the layout file ensures that all the cells and pad stacks are brought over. And we're going to want to make sure we update the central library. This will store all of the translated cells and pad stacks into our new central library that we created that's associated with this new project. So we'll keep both those checked and hit translate. It'll take just a minute here for the translator to go through. The important part here is we want to make sure if there's any warnings. Translator succeeded, so there were no warnings, there were no errors. If there were any errors, a message would pop up listing those errors, and we'd want to make sure to remedy those beforehand. So no errors, it succeeded, and we can check the log for details. I'll go ahead and just show you where that log file is stored. So in our project file that we're working with, this is the new project I just created. And in the PCB folder, log files, there's this Altium to Pads Professional Translation.log file, and everything will be listed in here that the translator did. Anything that we may need to be aware of, some warnings, as well as all the information of everything being translated. So it lists everything that it did so that we can reference it later. If for some reason you're running into problems, you can go ahead and reference this, but we're going to just leave it as it is for now. Okay, so I'll go ahead and close out of this translator, and I want to take a look inside my central library to make sure all of those cells came through. So we'll open up the central library again. Oh, looks like I already had it open. There it is. So Pads Library Tools, and let's go to the Cells partition, or excuse me, the Cells tab, and there should be a new, might need to refresh this. There we go. So in the Cells tab, there's a new partition now called Board 1, which is the name of the PCB in Altium. There's all these new cells in here that were not here earlier. So we can go ahead and click on these to preview them. And for the most part, they look good. We got some capacitors coming over, some jumpers, SOIC. Everything looks good so far. So it looks like everything came over just fine. So we're going to go ahead and continue moving forward. Okay, so we've translated the cells and path specs through layout. So next we're going to translate schematic symbols and parts. And this is a next step is going to look a little counterintuitive, but I'm going to try and explain what's going on while we're doing it. So I'm going to go ahead and close out of this design. And what I'm going to do now is I'm going to actually delete that project that I just created. So here's the project that we just created, and I'm going to delete this. The main point of those previous steps that I've done so far was just to bring over the cells and pad stacks into our new central library. What happened is we also brought over the layout, and it was linked to that blank schematic in Pads Designer. That's going to cause some problems later down the road if we keep it as it is. It could be remedied this way, but I found it much easier to go ahead and delete this, and then we'll go ahead and bring the schematic in first and the layout in later. So I'm going to go ahead and delete this whole project. And we're going to go ahead and open up Pads Designer again and create that project again. So design and entry Pads Designer. And again, the step that we're on now is we are going to translate the schematic, symbols, and parts. Okay, so Pads Professional, we're going to want to navigate to our central library that we created earlier and brought in all of our cells and pad stacks. So navigate to the LMC file and name it, we'll name it the same thing, USB panel. Go ahead and create this new project. Okay, and we can see that we have a new blank project created. So now what we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and open up the Altium Schematic Translator. So this is in Pads Designer File, Import Altium. And in here, we're going to navigate to our schematic in Altium. So we'll go to navigate to where that is, USB panel. And in here, you can either select your PRJ PCB or your schematic doc files. If you have a PRJ PCB for your project, this is better to select because this will include all of the schematic docs that are associated with that project. If you don't have your PRJ PCB, you can still translate the schematic docs. If you have multiple ones, you'll just have to iterate one by one on translating them. But lucky for us, we have this PRJ PCB, so we'll go ahead and select that, and then that references the underlying schematic. We've got that selected. A few settings over here is translate attributes. So we're going to want all of the attributes from Altium to come over to Pads Professional, so we'll keep that checked. Translate symbols only. This would be useful if for some reason you didn't need the schematic design or you were updating your library for some reason. We're going to leave that unchecked because we want our schematic to come over as well as all of our symbols in the central library, which is the next one. Create that design library. Create generic symbols. We can leave that blank. This package type is grayed out. That's if we're doing netlist flow, which this is not available in Pads Professional, this option, so that's all grayed out. And using the default color scheme is available as well. So the schematic is all set up. And let's go ahead and check on the settings. In here is where we define the settings in Altium and what they're going to come over to in Pad Professional. So there are a couple of configuration files that are shipped with Pad Professional in your install folder, and it'll come up by default. For the most part, these work well, but if for some reason you are translating a lot of designs and you notice some attributes on your end that you want to come over as a certain value on the Pad Professional side, you can edit this and you can actually save these configuration files so that if you're bringing in multiple designs that have the same attributes or something of that nature, you're able to just use the same configuration file without having to set it up each time. So for the most part, the defaults are fine in here. Another thing that I want to reference here is this property use translated central library. Now this property, I'm going to leave blank for the translation today, but this is useful if you already have a corporate library, a corporate central library that you're translating all of your parts to, and you want your design to target that central library and reference that corporate central library for your design. So because in this demo today, I'm just using a local central library, a project-specific central library for the design, we're going to leave this blank because we don't have a previously translated library or a corporate library with this design. But if you do have that, you're going to want to reference that in this field here. There's that. There were a couple things that I've changed that I've found for this translation to make it come over smoothly. So I already have a configuration file, and I'm going to go ahead and load that now. And I've just saved it in my project folder. So we've got that all loaded up. And for the most part, it's pretty similar. One other thing to note is that if you do leave any of these values blank, but keep something in the name field, that property will be deleted when it comes over to Pad Professional. So on the component, ordering number is going to be deleted, but on the package, that will be translated over to the device attribute. So if there's anything that you know on Altium that you really don't want in Pad Professional, you can type that name value in this field and then go ahead and just leave it blank so that it'll get deleted. And if you do want to edit anything, you can edit it in this user interface here, as well as the CNV file is editable in any text editor. So if you find that easier, you can use that as well. So we'll go ahead back over to schematics, and let's go ahead and hit translate to translate the schematic as well as all of the symbols and parts. Okay, translator finished successfully. If there are any errors in this box, you're going to want to go ahead and check those out and remedy them. There's no errors for us, but we'll just go ahead and take a look at the notes. I created a central library partition for this, loaded the property definition file, as well as some warnings, duplicated pins. So it looks like we had multiple ground pins on a certain symbol, and it just renamed those sequentially. And reference designators not containing a number. These are just warnings, so they won't cause any problems in our translation, but it's good to be able to reference those. And we'll go ahead and close out of this, but if we wanted to check it out later, it is stored in our project directory. Okay, so I'll go ahead and close that, and we should have the schematic loading here in a second, and we'll take a look to make sure that everything looks just fine. Okay, so here's our translated schematic. We can see all of our symbols seem to come over correctly. There's nothing glaringly obviously wrong with this, so it looks pretty good so far. No dangling nets or anything of that nature. All of the properties seem to come over, so this looks pretty good so far. And I want to go ahead and take a look at our central library and make sure that all of the symbols were translated in there as well. Okay, in symbols, we have a new partition now, USB panel, and we can see all of these symbols came over, and they look, for the most part, they look pretty good. And we'll check the parts. We also have a partition USB panel, and with these parts, we have symbols and cells associated with them. So for the most part, this is looking good, and it looks like we should be able to package and forward annotate. So it's looking good so far, nothing blatantly obvious wrong with it, so we'll go ahead and continue moving forward. So again, so we now translated the schematic symbols and parts. And next up, we're going to go ahead and translate our layout. So in here, we're going to go ahead and open up the PADS Professional Translator Altium PCB translator. Again, so we're going to do this step again like we did earlier, but this time we're going to mainly focus on saving the layout file. So we'll go ahead and navigate to our Altium PCB. And then select the PADS Professional Project file, which is this one right here that PCB is going to link to. And in here, you'll notice now there's actually two project files, both named the same with one as a backup. And so what happened when we translated the Altium schematic, PADS Designer created a backup of our previous schematic in there. And since I created a new project with this, it was just a blank schematic. So this backup file is just that blank schematic that was default when I opened up PADS Designer. So if you are translating multiple schematic files into one project, these could come in useful if anything goes wrong. You do have a backup that was automatically created. If we wanted to, we could go ahead and delete this backup. One, because we know that the schematic came in successfully, and two, because we know that it's just a blank schematic, so there's no useful information in it. But I'll click on the USB panel, which is our active project. Okay. So we have our Altium Design reference here, as well as our PADS Designer project file. We're going to go ahead and translate the design, but we're going to uncheck Update Central Library. Because we already have all of our cells and pad stacks, we don't want that updated in the central library. We're only focusing on translating the design. So we'll go ahead and translate that. Okay, and it looks like it succeeded. So that's good. And we'll go ahead and open up PADS Professional just to take a look at what came over and see how that looks before we move on to the next step. And again, if you guys have any questions, feel free to enter those in the chat box. Looks like there haven't been any asked yet, but we'll have some time at the end for some question and answer session. Back annotation has been disabled. That's okay. We'll get to that in a minute here. Do I want to forward annotate? We'll forward annotate in a minute, so I'm going to hit no now, but we'll get that after we package the design. So far this looks good. It looks like everything came over correctly. So we're going to go ahead and call that a success on translating the layout, and we're going to go ahead and move to package schematic and forward annotation. So in PADS Designer, we're going to go ahead and package the schematic. Just go Tools, Package. And this will just make sure that all of the symbols on the design are referenced to parts and that they're able to be sent to layout. So in here, we're going to have the operation set as package symbols. Optimization, we're going to want to do the whole board. We'll allow alpha-only reference designators. And then PDB extraction options, we're going to go ahead and delete local data, then rebuild all local library data. So the way that PADS Designer works is that all of the symbols on the schematic are sort of cached in the design. So each time we do this, it will go to the central library, pull the symbols onto the schematic, and have a local copy of those symbols that's on the schematic. Since we just translated the design, we're going to delete that local cache and rebuild it. So it's going to go back to the central library and pull everything to make sure that all of our data is intact here. So we'll go ahead and use that option there and hit OK. And there's no errors with packaging, so that's good, but there are 15 warnings. Let's just go ahead and take a look at these real quick. Looks like we have part property mismatch. These all seem to be very similar, so we'll go ahead and click on one. And it's just telling us that there's a different value on the symbol versus what's in the parts database. So for example, this resistor has a value of 4.7K, and then that's in the on the symbol, and then in the parts DB, it's 330. So it looks like in Altium, this may have been changed on the design. And so what PADS Designer is just letting us know that, hey, there's a mismatch. So you're going to want to go ahead and look and determine which one you actually want to use. This won't cause any packaging errors. We're still able to move forward, because it's not a critical piece of information, but it's just letting us know that, hey, you're going to want to take a look at this before you ship the design, probably, to make sure that everything is intact. So we'll continue moving forward, but this is something that if you translate your design, you're going to want to check on and make sure that you're using the correct values there. And these are all very similar for all of these. Okay. So now this has been packaged correctly, and now we want to forward annotate to make sure that the schematic and the layout are synchronized and that we're able to continue editing the design and move forward to production or whatever we wish to do moving forward with this new design. So in Past Professional Layout, we'll go ahead and open up the forward annotation, which is this project integration box. So go ahead and select that. Our goal here is to get all of these lights here to green. This will mean that everything is synchronized between the schematic and the layout, as well as our constraints with the central database for this project. So that's our goal here. What we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and leave this rebuild local library data because we've already got all of our data from the central library on the schematic side. I'm going to remove these two options here. What this will do is if there's any hanging traces or floating traces and vias, those will be removed during this process. I'm going to remove the checkboxes there because I don't want to really touch the design in case there's something that may be necessary in it. So I'll leave those blank. And this looks good. So I'm going to go ahead and click this amber button here to forward annotate and see if this is able to come over successfully. Okay, so we have 1 amber light and 3 green lights. So everything's synchronized with our constraints, so that's all good, but something didn't go right with the forward annotation from schematic. And when you do a translation, I typically see errors either in packaging or forward annotation. So this is usually where something would come up and you're going to want to remedy that to make sure that you can edit your design moving forward. So let's go ahead and close this and check out our forward annotation text file. We can open up the file viewer here and forward annotation. Okay, so let's check here. In this dialog box, it looks like there were 3 errors and 6 warnings. So let's go ahead and focus on these errors here. And it's saying no valid cells were found for part number header 5. So we'll go ahead and check on that and see what might be going on with that, as well as these other errors. They all seem to be similar. So no valid cells were found for part number header 5x2, as well as for this one, Traco. I'm guessing that these may have been renamed by the translator and may be referenced incorrectly, but let's go ahead and take a look in our central library. So we can open up the central library from Past Professional as well. Okay, so let's go check out those parts that it was referencing. So one of them was the Traco, I believe. So this Traco part has symbols, and there's no cell associated. Okay, so that's why it's not forward annotating, because this part is on the schematic, and it has no cell reference. So PAD's layout is not able to pick up a cell to link it to this part, so that's why we're receiving that error. So let's go ahead and take a look at this to see what might be going on. Let's go to the pin mapping to see the symbols and cells associated with this. There's our symbol associated with this part. That looks good. And it looks like we do have a cell that's associated with this. It looks like there's a space in there. My guess is that that was renamed. So let's go back to the central library, look at the cells. There it is. Traco test 1 has an underscore. So it looks like in Altium, it probably had a space, which was renamed to an underscore. And for some reason, that did not come through on the translator. So it still has a space in there, which doesn't exist in our central library. So we're going to go ahead and replace that with a new cell. And this will already be filtered down to the cells with that number of pins. And here we go, is that new Traco test with the underscore. So we're going to reference that new cell and hit OK. And if you notice, all of our pin mapping stays the same. So that's nothing that we have to edit or worry about. So that's good. Let's hit OK on that. And let's go change the other 2 parts as well. So header 5 was one of them. And again, that's a space that probably changed to an underscore. There it is. And hit OK. And header 5x2. Again, our pin mapping is all right. So we'll go ahead and save these new part mappings that we did and close out of this. And in here, let's just make sure that they are associated correctly for Traco, symbol, and now we have a cell associated with it. Okay, so that should remedy those errors. Let's go ahead and try it again. Close out of the forward annotation log file. And let's go to Setup Project Integration. We'll use the same settings and we'll click on the amber button to try and forward annotate. Okay, so we have all green lights, so it should all be synchronized, which is good. So we'll close out of this, and you can always see the green lights in the bottom right corner as well. So it looks like our design is in sync and everything is translated. So let's go ahead and just make sure that this all looks good. See if we can cross probe. There we go. So we're able to cross probe. So everything has been synchronized. Everything has been translated. We have our specific central library, and all looks good now. There we go. So there's our Altium design that has been translated to PAD's professional layout, as well as our schematic. Everything looks good now. And so there we go. Yeah, we were able to successfully package schematic and forward annotate. So this design is done. If you do have multiple designs, you will just go through the same process that we went through here on your other designs to bring them all over to PAD's professional. And now we're going to go ahead and go to questions. Of course, I do want to give my contact information again. So if you do have multiple designs that you're bringing over, if you have any questions about the webinar today that may come up later, or you're having any issues, feel free to reach out to your local account manager, your local AE, or me directly, and we'll be happy to help you out and make sure that you get taken care of. I'm going to go ahead and look at questions, see if there's any questions in here. They have problems in packaging because the cell name property has the full name, but the cell in the library is different. So this may need to be looked at on a case-by-case basis, but I believe that I showed an example in the demo where the cell name was incorrect, and we were able to remap that. So hopefully that could work for you. What I've also seen is that sometimes during the translation, let me go ahead and show this in PAD's Designer, is that we'll get a cell name property coming over. This is actually not necessary in the PAD's Professional integrated flow because we have a part. So what is necessary is our part number. This references a part in the central library, and that part references a cell. So if this cell name is different than the one that's referenced on the part number, you can sometimes run into errors during packaging or forward annotation. So we could go ahead and delete this actually if we wanted, but sometimes people need it for maybe their bill of materials or something of that nature. So that is one thing to look at. If you do have other things that you're running into that maybe weren't addressed here, there's many different things that can sometimes come up. Feel free to reach out and we'll be able to do a WebEx with your specific design to try and get that translated. That is all the questions. Again, my contact information is here, so if you do have any questions, if you run into anything in the future, anything PAD's Professional related, feel free to reach out to me and we'll be happy to help you out going forward.